The Kineticist is a class introduced to Pathfinder 2e by the book Rage of Elements. A Kineticist is basically an elemental superhero with power over one or multiple of the 6 elements. They wear light armor, use simple weapons, and their key attribute is Constitution. In other words, they can take a lot of physical stress, because their body has been irrevocably connected to an element. So what's the point of a Kineticist? Let's say you were playing a fighter. As your fighter levels up, they get feats, which represent a new technique your fighter can do, like combat grab or intimidating strike. When a wizard levels up, they also get feats, but not as many as the fighter. A wizard can and does learn new techniques, but most of their power comes from the spells they know, and when they level up, they learn new and more powerful spells, which can produce strange and fantastical effects. A Kineticist is a mix. A Kineticist has control over an element, so they gain abilities that are a lot like spells, like shooting fire, but they gain them through feats. So it's more like they're learning to control a physical skill. So while a wizard might cast a spell like breathe fire, a Kineticist can shoot a blast of fire, and they do it as easily as a fighter swings a sword. These spell-like feats that the Kineticist uses are called impulses. Basically, any action that a Kineticist does that involves controlling their element is an impulse, so it's important to remember, impulses are your meat and potatoes. When you first make your Kineticist, you'll have some choices to make. The first choice is what element you want to control. There are 6 choices: fire, water, earth, air, wood, or metal. Before you can use any of your impulses as a Kineticist, you must use the action Channel Elements. Channel Elements activates your kinetic aura. Bits and pieces of your element will start floating and orbiting around you. You need to have your kinetic aura active in order to use any of your impulses. Again, your impulses are all of your powers as a Kineticist, and you need to have your kinetic aura active to be able to use them. As you level up, you'll gain new impulses, but there are 3 basic impulses that all Kineticists eventually have. You start with 2 of them. The first is base kinesis, which lets you generate, move, or suppress a certain amount of your element. Simple and cool. The second is elemental blast, which lets you attack with your element. The attack roll is your Constitution plus your class DC proficiency. The damage and range depends on your chosen element, so you need to look that up, and the blast can be melee or ranged. If it's in melee, it does more damage. It can also be done with 1 or 2 actions, and if it's 2 actions, it does more damage, based on your Constitution. The final impulse all Kineticists get comes at level 3 and is called Extract Elements. Extract Elements lets you weaken creatures of your element. If you find a water genie, for example, you can suck away some of its power. Remember, to do any of these impulses, your kinetic aura must be active. Is it annoying to have to spend an action at the start of every combat to activate your kinetic aura? No, because when you channel your element, if you want, you can automatically use an elemental blast for free, or a stance impulse, which I'll explain later. You also get 2 impulse feats at level 1, and a class feat. Your class feats include all of your impulse feats, so you could potentially start with 3 additional impulses. But there's a second choice you need to make at level 1. Are you a single gate or dual gate Kineticist? Single gate means you get 1 element, but dual gate means you get 2 elements. In fact, every 4 levels or so you can make basically the same choice. Do you want to expand the portal and get stronger with one of your elements, or add a new element to your repertoire? When you channel elements, you channel all of your kinetic elements at the same time. The other restriction is that of your 2 starting impulse feats, 1 needs to be of 1 element and the other needs to be of the other element. That's not a particularly tough restriction, which might beg the question, why have fewer elements when you can have more? We already talked about channel elements and the various impulses you can do. There's another layer of complexity to the Kineticist called gate junctions. Don't be afraid. These are just bonus powers that usually activate automatically. For example, you can give yourself elemental resistance. You can give your kinetic aura special effects when allies or enemies are inside it. You can train yourself in a new skill. There are also special powers that activate if you get a critical hit on an elemental blast, or if you use any 2-action impulse. Each element has only 1 gate function for each of these categories, so there's not much to choose. If you decide not to gain power over a new element, then you get a new gate junction for one of your existing elements. At level 1, it must be an impulse junction, but at later levels you can choose. It probably makes sense that if you focus on 1 element, you get really good at it, but if you have multiple elements, you have more variety. The cool part is that eventually you could do almost any combination. You could focus on 2 elements, you could focus mostly on 1 element, but then have a couple of other backup ones or something else. Now let's go over some cool traits that your impulses might have. The first thing is that you can only take impulse feats if you can channel one of the impulse impulse's elemental traits. Hopefully that was obvious from the beginning. If your element is water, you take water impulses. Certain impulses are composite, meaning they require multiple elements. For example, Steam Knight requires fire and water. You can also see that Steam Knight is a stance feat. You can only have one stance active at a time, and you can only change stances once per round. It is literally what stance your character is in. There are also infusion actions. Not very many, but these are meant to be used directly before an impulse, and will alter that impulse. The only rule is that you can't do anything between the infusion action and the impulse. And finally, overflow impulses. All impulses require you to have your kinetic aura active. Overflow impulses are no different. However, they then cancel your kinetic aura, and you can't use any more overflow impulses that round. The idea is that you use all of your energy and power in one big kabloom. Bloom. Bloom. The Kineticist is super cool, and in my opinion, not that confusing. However, there are a lot of options, and part of the fun is that you can do cool stuff without technically casting any spells. To recap, you have one or multiple elements you have power over. You use channel elements to activate your kinetic aura. While it's active, you can use Elemental Blast, Base Kinesis, and after level 3, Extract Elements. As you level up, you can learn new impulse feats to use while your kinetic aura is active. You can have control over multiple different elements, which can give you access to composite impulse feats, which require multiple elements. If you stick with a limited number of elements, you can enhance your existing powers with cool bonus abilities called gate junctions. When you're ready to finish with a bang, you can use an overflow impulse, which ends your kinetic aura with a huge culminating effect.